Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to another episode of What's on the Playlist today. And what's on the playlist today is the album "The Violent Femmes" by the band The Violent Femmes. This is their debut album. The Violent Femmes is a punk rock band originally from Milwaukee, forming in the early '80s. They were discovered by the Pretenders, who they were playing on the sidewalk in front of the venue where the Pretenders were going to be playing that night. Chrissy Hines actually heard them, and invited them to do a set, between, I think it was between like their opening band and their actual set, which is kind of cool. I found that out when I was researching this a little bit. The lost my train of thought. Debut album, early '80s. Oh yeah, Violent Femmes were considered an integral part in. If I can, I'm not even talking. Violent Femmes were considered an integral part of the, at the time, underground punk rock and alternative band scene. This album, their debut album, was critically well acclaimed. It was actually certified gold like 4 years after it was released, and platinum 4 years after that, despite the fact that it never charted in the Billboard Top 200. It wound up debuting in the Billboard Top, or not debuting, but it finally reached the Billboard Top 200 like over 9 years after it was initially released. So that's kind of unusual. I don't think that happens too often. This is the band's most successful album to date. They've released 10 albums, a bunch of singles and compilations. This is still their most successful piece of work. And I agree. Of the music that I've heard, this is still my favorite. Blister in the Sun, Gone Daddy Gone, Kiss Off, and Add It Up are the ones that are, I think, the best known out of this. Blister in the Sun is the only one I've ever actually heard on the radio. That's actually kind of how I got introduced to the band. I used to, back in the days before you could stream music, I used to record music off the radio. I could afford a cassette cheaper than I could afford to buy new albums. Plus, I lived in a small town with no access to a record store, so it's the only way I could get music. I could buy blank cassettes, couldn't buy albums. But, so I managed to record it off the radio while recording a bunch of other stuff. I liked the song, and when didn't know who the band was. I found out this was one of the albums that I found or saw in one of my, I want to say cooler friends, but it was more coworkers. I was working in a restaurant in Portland, Maine, and we'd have parties with the whole restaurant partied together. So we would have parties at people's apartments and stuff. This is one of the albums I would see flipping through other people's record collections. And when I saw Blister in the Sun on the back, it's like, oh, I know that song. I'll go out and buy the album. The girl on the cover, I found out, was a little girl and her mother were walking by as they were doing as the band was trying to get photos for the album, offered to pay them $100 to take pictures. And when they interviewed this girl years later as an adult, she said that they told her there was animals inside the building. That's why she's looking in the window. She's looking to see the animals, and she remembers being very angry that she couldn't see them. At the end of the shoot, she was just super cranky and super frustrated. She was not behaving well, but that's all because they lied to her to get her to look in the window. Things people do to get pictures out of kids. If you've never heard the band themselves, as far as oh, that's something else. The lead singer has been compared to Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers. If you don't know who that is, that's fine, because that annoyed the lead singer because he was trying to sound like a different band, some like psychedelic band out of Los Angeles, and I had never heard of. So another amusing thing about this album. I find this band, as far as the quality of their music, I mean, they are a punk rock band from the early mid '80s. They're not quite as harsh as bands like the Sex Pistols, but they're also not quite as polished as bands like the Dead Milkmen. Dead Milkmen tends to be a little bit more lyrically, like they actually try and tell stories with their songs. Violent Femmes do too, but they're a bit more poetic. Um, this sounds like a cheap garage band. Like it sounds like, you know, the people don't know how to play their instruments very well, which is deliberate because they actually were a fairly decent. Um, they were fairly decent players. They weren't like pro, you know, they're no Roy Clarks or anything, but they were actually decent musicians. The cheap garage sound was deliberate on their part. So I find them somewhere in the mix between, like I said, not quite as polished as the Dead Milkmen, not as raw as the Sex Pistols, but their sound was also very deliberate. They kind of chose their sound um, fairly well and on purpose. Yeah, the singer has kind of like this whiny, nasally voice. I'm not sure how. This is one of those bands that I'm not sure how to recommend. You know, despite the fact that I really, really like it, it's a good high energy album. This has bonus tracks. The CD re-release contained 2 bonus tracks. There was also like a 20th or 20th anniversary edition, which added like 20 other songs, like live recordings or studio versions of other songs and other albums and stuff, which I'm not sure if I'm ever going to bother to get. Or in these days, I'm not sure if it's even possible to get any these days. But yeah, the lead singer's voice is kind of whiny and nasally. So it's hard to recommend because the quality of the voice and the quality of the sound, or at least the quality of the music, is kind of low. But as I said, it's also deliberate. I really do like this album. If you're gonna take anything off of this, I would recommend listening to the one song, the first track, "Blister in the Sun." That's the song that got me hooked, and I really like the other stuff too. But yeah, this is a hard recommend. I think Dead Milkmen was a hard recommend for me too, because these guys take themselves more seriously than the Dead Milkmen do. Dead Milkmen are just out there, they're goofing off. These guys are trying to sound serious. So it's, you know, taking them at their presentation, they're trying to sound like they have something to say instead of just goofing off. But still, this is a staple, not a staple for the radio, more of a staple of this is one of the albums the cool kids got because they were too cool to listen to the radio back in the mid '80s. This falls into that category, I think. But having said that, still a great album. The band and the album itself were very influential for the follow-up style of music of indie punk, folk punk, alternative rock, those type of bands. This album was influential in grunge music. You know, you look at people who are into those, you know, find big names in those type of genres, and a lot of them will recommend Violent Femmes as one of their influences. So, having said that, as always, thanks for watching. If you like this crap, there's other crap out there. And until next time, good hunting.